Hey everyone, welcome to another product deep dive by Sounds Profitable. I'm very excited this month because we're going to try something a little bit different. So we have Dylan, who is the Director of Solutions Architecture from Kevel, and we have Andrew, who's the CTO of PRX. And usually what we do in the product deep dives is we walk through a UI, and we walk through how you actually hands-on can work with all these products. But Kevel is something a little bit different. And it's something that I really think the entire industry has to take to heart to really grow. And what Kevel is it's a third-party ad server. It is something that exists on its own that you can build into your own product. So you can handle all the hosting aspect yourself, and then you can use them for ad serving. And it's got all the bells and whistles, all the compliance you could want. And what's really exciting is that PRX and Andrew from PRX is going to talk to us a little bit about how PRX made that decision and what ultimately led to this great relationship and why you should consider it too. So guys, first off, thank you so much for both of you joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Good to see you, Brian.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome. So Dylan, tell us a little bit more about Kevel. Did I get the gist? Did I miss anything on there?
Yeah, you did definitely. You definitely nailed it. So we're a suite of APIs that allow people to kind of build their own ad serving solutions, and so we provide kind of all of the infrastructure and let all of our customers kind of decide how they want to use all of our building blocks to build out something specific for them.
Very cool. And Andrew, did I nail it pretty accurately there too? Like PRX has you have your own hosting that you built internally, but you use Kevel for ad
Absolutely, yeah. And that was really the thing that we were looking for. You know, we were pretty good at audio, pretty good at understanding podcasting, but ad tech and a targeting engine, decision engine that could do all that work for us and getting that in place quickly, you know, it was amazing, honestly, to be able to just plug something in.
How quickly did you guys plug it in? I mean, like as far as I've known you, or as long as I've known you, you guys have had that relationship. So we haven't interacted at the stage where that decision happened, but how quickly from like getting the documents to getting it up was it?
That's a good question. Well, we had done so this was back in about 2015. So I'm going to stretch back to remember kind of a little bit of how it all went down. But you know, at 2015, when we were looking around, there were a few folks doing this kind of thing in the podcasting space, but not a ton, right? And certainly not as many options as there are that have come up since. And as we kind of looked around at what there was, we kind of felt like, you know what, we really feel like we could do this ourselves. As you say, you know, we have a development team, we have developers who are really good in kind of media serving and audio. We feel like a real strength there. We have all the relationships already. We were already hosting podcasts. We just didn't really have this ad insertion piece. We didn't have the ad piece. And we tried a couple of prototypes. I think we prototyped with, I think originally actually with Google Ad Manager, which I think maybe we were still calling DFP at the time. But it really wasn't meant for this, right? Like you can it's definitely a square peg into a round hole. Like you can try to make other kind of ad serving systems kind of do your bidding and integrate into a larger system, but it really wasn't meant for that. And so what we really started looking for was something with an API. You know, if you want to see a developer's eyes light up, you talk about an API. And, you know, for me, Kevel was the answer that, you know, if you're looking to do payments, you go look for something like Stripe, right? You look for something that's got an amazing API, amazing developer tools. People understand that value. Kevel is that for advertising, is kind of what I tell people, just as a shorthand, you know. And for us, that's very much what worked. You know, we had done this very rough prototype with this other system. It didn't really work that well. Did some hunting around, looked at some open source options, other stuff as we tend to do. And then we found Kevel, and the API was just super well documented, easy to get going. The UI was really straightforward, honestly looked very intuitive. And like the other things that we had looked, if you kind of know how ad tech works a little bit, it's going to make sense to you. You're not going to struggle. And very quickly we were able to kind of plug in with those APIs and start to build something out. I think it was more a matter of figuring out how to translate some of the ideas of podcasting into the Kevel kind of entities and objects and things like that. Like they have a site, we have a show. They have, you know, zones, we have kind of pre-rolls and post-rolls. But beyond kind of the kind of ideas that we had to kind of map the actual coding didn't take that long. Also, I would say like as an estimate, we probably had it up and working within like a week, honestly, because we
That's really crazy.
could just pop it in.
That's awesome. And you're super right on the API things. Like it's so funny. I definitely can remember the 2015 time period where everybody was just like, well, we need to have everything in an API. And you can see the legacy aspect of it because people just ask for it. They don't necessarily know what they mean. I love when someone's like, can I get all of this through an API for reporting? And it's like, do you mean that you want to like at will just call for this whenever, this robust reporting, or do you just mean like you want to determine the schedule you receive it and how? But what this is I mean, like it is a bunch of API calls that you can build into your own system to be able to call out to handle all the ad serving. And when I look at everybody who's built their own hosting platform, we have some of the coolest and smartest ad tech I've seen in podcasting, but a lot of it was built in podcasting for podcasting. And I think there's a really neat aspect of Kevel that it's built ad tech first and it can be added in to anybody else's layer, right? Like podcasting is just one of the examples. Dylan, what other mediums does this work for?
Yeah, we have some really fascinating use cases. We have people that use us in in-dash displays in cars, in jukeboxes, in bars and restaurants, in billboards, in certainly every type of app and website imaginable as well.
I think that's really neat. And so, Andrew, you guys built your own hosting, and how long had you had the hosting before you started integrating the ad aspect of it?
Oh God, I mean, we've been doing podcast hosting in some form or other since before I started at PRX, and I've been there 15 years. So I think it was sometime in like the early 2000, 2001. But it was really when things were heating up, and that moment where we really in around the 2015 time period where it was worth it to do something more than just baked in ads and really to get into things that are kind of both dynamic in the serving and then further into it's only gotten crazier since.
I think that's really cool. I mean, to know that like you guys had that and you had the core aspect of it and you could hold on to the core, which you call your hosting Dovetail, right?
That's right. We call it Dovetail
Awesome.
after the carpentry joint.
Oh.
The idea of you're putting the ads together with the audio, like a nice seamless joint.
I like that.
I've always wondered where that name came from.
Here we go. We got our PRX fact.
It's great.
We'll set a scavenger hunt and we'll have to figure that. And that, I mean, that's really neat. And did you ever prototype something internally first to handle this?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of had 3 kind of generations of kind of getting there. We tend to be very, at least little a agile in how we do things. So we had started with just something that would, do things and kind of just update them on the CDN, like update them in storage, right? So like we can have one set of ads and we just copy those into all the episodes and just literally kind of on disk have the updated version of the files. That was kind of the first generation of Dovetail, which we used for just like the back catalog for some shows so we could swap stuff out. And then we did that other kind of prototype again, starting to look around for doing something dynamic and trying out different systems. And then really when we hit on Kevel was when we kind of put things into overdrive and then built out the rest of the kind of system to accommodate and be able to use it for kind of also, I mean, the other nice thing about the APIs is it's not just the decision engine, although that's obviously what we use the most, but you can also set everything up through the API as well. So you have a new show, new zones, new things you want to do, as well as, reporting and things. But that really let us build out the rest of the interfaces and things we needed to do to build out the system. Actually, one cool thing we did, I really like, and we use a lot, is this system called Backsaw. Again, sticking with the carpentry jokes. But we actually wrote a system that will let us kind of simulate what's going to happen when we do like 100, 1,000 downloads at a time. And you can go in and I want to look at this show and look like if I did 1,000 downloads, what would I get? And it will actually kind of lay out well, these are each of the zones and what you would get in each one. And 20% of them are this ad and 50% are that ad. And that was really only possible because one developer kind of went off and just wrote that because there's an API, right? So we can immediately just make a ton of calls, even through front end code like in JavaScript just to like try all those things and test it out and display it.
So that is a test call that doesn't affect any of the performance of the campaigns, but represents it in real time as what you would experience if you got all those calls immediately.
Correct.
That's super
exactly
cool.
Yeah.
The reason I asked you that very poorly worded leading question was really to say that, like, you've tried this, you built some stuff that works, and in a matter of a week or so, you implemented Kevel, which also means that if somebody, like, this isn't just a product for people who like work at a hosting company that don't have ad tech yet. This is for someone who's fed up with the support aspect of it. Because I've had the luxury of working in this space for a long time. And I don't think a lot of people at hosting companies are just like, my episode won't play. My artwork doesn't show up. That happens. I'm sure it does a little bit, but I think that gets flagged real quick, right? Because it's the same everywhere. It's the exact example you just said there. I set an ad for 25% share of voice, and it definitely didn't serve that much. That right there, that example that you gave to simulate that, right? Real powerful stuff, because the ad op stuff is the most time intensive. And the worst part about it is, and I think we all know this in advertising, the smallest campaigns are the loudest campaigns. So being able to have these tools, these APIs, and work with a partner like Kevel that's their main focus. I mean, Dylan, you guys don't do any hosting, right? Like, you don't have any CDN, any content aspect. It is purely just the ad server.
Yeah, you can upload things to us. We can store things on our CDN and return them from our CDN. So we do have that in place to be able to handle some of that. But it's really not kind of the core to what we do. The core aspect is like the decision, making the decision, and returning those decisions obviously very quickly.
Yeah. And on the speed aspect there, I mean, I think that in podcasting, we don't talk a lot about the speed of return, right? I think we got a lot more leniency, and I don't think we got a lot more time where that leniency is going to really fly. We used to talk about like 500 milliseconds, right? That's like the time you got to get the ad back. Andrew might think it's a little bit shorter, but I don't know. How long is the time? Like, what is a valid and good amount of time for someone to press play and the podcast to start playing, Andrew? Like, what's a goal metric for you?
Let's just say there's kind of two pieces here. I think the experiential metric that you're talking about, Brian, is right on. That ideally you want to be able to, I think, get somebody listening. I think probably half a second to a second is like where we try to aim for. Now, sometimes things will be longer, but when you're trying to get a good experience for people, you don't want them to hit play and then wait for too long. There's really two pieces to that, though. As you know, like, there's sort of like the decision process when someone first makes a request for a download, where we have to decide, and this is perhaps different from other things like on a web page, where the web page loads and then you load the ads, right? It doesn't work that way in podcasting,
Yeah.
right? In podcasting, it's embedded into it. And so we actually need to know at the time that you start from your first request to download, we need to kind of come up with what we call an arrangement of kind of the audio and then what ads get put into it, and then direct you to download that particular arrangement. And in a perfect world, we'll have already generated that arrangement and sitting on the CDN in an edge location. So as soon as we redirect you to it, if we've seen that arrangement before and already kind of cached it, you're going to get a super fast response. So then, assuming CDNs do their job, which they do pretty well of caching things and edge locations, the Kevel piece of this is on that initial kind of decision process and redirect, where we kind of figure out that arrangement. And and you also know, Brian, and educated more people than anyone probably on all the other redirects and things that you don't necessarily have control of.
Yeah.
But this is the moment we do have, which is that, okay, whatever other systems you've come through, you're now actually asking for the audio. We want to very quickly turn that around and get you over to it. One nice thing about Kevel, I'll say, is that their placements API that we use for that, you can request all of the ads at once. So it isn't as though I have to kind of like, what's in the pre-roll, what's in the post-roll. Yeah, it's all in one. And then it can also consider things like ad clash or other kind of issues in that single request and make sure you're not getting dupes or other things. So it's a very kind of clean single API request. It's extremely fast. It's usually, I was going to go look, but I want to say it's usually like in the 10 to 20 millisecond kind of range.
Wow.
Often.
Okay.
I did pull it up. It's if I'm allowed to share, it's 18 milliseconds per placement over the last hour. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
and that single request, they must be fanning out kind of in their logic, if you will, for a lot of it. So that single request, even if we're asking for 8 or 9 ads, comes back extremely fast. It's definitely been, we're spoiled. Honestly, I have to say we're spoiled.
Well, Dylan, instead of the two of us just talking about how great you are, I want to ask you a few questions. But I truly mean this. Like, here's the fun about the deep dives. Like, I only work with people on the deep dives have products that I'm really excited for people to learn about, right? There are so many cool things out there that we're not just telling you about this product because they want to do a deep dive. We're telling you about it because I really believe that there's a big headache in ad serving, and you could go at it alone, but it is a substantial amount of people at a company to accomplish it. Dylan, how many people are at Kevel?
Yeah, we're closing in on 70, I think.
70 people at a company dedicated to ad serving. Ad serving, right? I can, Andrew, how big's your engineering team?
What are we up to now? We're hiring. So first of all, if you're interested, sorry, is that the wrong?
No,
pitch?
I like
Anyways,
it too.
yeah.
Everybody should try and apply it for PR.
We are as well. So
there we go.
Us too.
If you're interested in privacy safe ad tech and ethical ad tech, come talk to us. Our engineering team, we're about 6 people, 7 people, and then we have like others.
Yeah. So we're talking like easily, 7 to 10 times the amount. I'm assuming not everybody at Kevel is on like an engineer on that end, but I'm sure a substantial number of you are. But that's really neat. So part of ad serving that's been really attractive lately, and that we keep running into this roadblock on, is that like VAST, which is the gateway in to make calls to another ad server, it's just not supported by enough hosting platforms. Right now, what we're seeing is that, at the time of recording this is summer 2021, we have Whooshka, Omni Studio, Art19, and Megaphone are only the 4 partners that have that offer for a client to log into and set VAS, a call to an external ad server, in the platform themselves. There are some that allow it behind the scenes, but until it is a customer-facing tool, I don't count it. VAS is how we connect to programmatic. Programmatic is how some of the bigger holding companies and bigger brands out there start buying into podcasting at scale. It's got a lot of complications, and we'll talk through it with Andrew. But Dylan, does Kevel out of the box support VAS?
Yeah, definitely.
That's amazing right there, right? So even people with their own hosting platform that have dynamic ad insertion, this can be an upgrade simply because it has VAS, and you can connect into programmatic instead of hardwiring it in the back end and crossing your fingers and hoping it works. I think one of the cool parts here is that, Andrew, I really respect that PRX and you are so privacy focused. You had the privacy symposium. We've had a chance to collaborate on a lot of this. I want to hear from Dylan first, and then a little bit of you. Like, IP address sharing, GDPR and CCPA and all the privacy laws, like that's a big part of this, because if I understand this correctly, I own my CDN when working with Kevel. So I own where the podcast is hosted. I get the requests in from the player, but I have to send some data out to Kevel. So Dylan, what data do I send to Kevel? What can I augment it with? And how is that security handled?
Yeah, it's such an interesting, medium to serve into because of those kind of limitations. You don't have all of that information. Again, kind of going back to what Kevel does, like we want to provide that infrastructure so that people can use us in podcasts and also use us in dash displays in cars and jukeboxes and everything else. When making a request up to us, obviously there's some podcast specific information, what podcast it is, the sections that Andrew was mentioning earlier, the sections of the individual episodes, where those ad spots are. How many ad spots there are, of course. And then episode information. Is this, the first episode, 10th episode, so on. We also can do some things with the data that we get. So in podcasts, you get a user agent and an IP address. We can have you combine those into a user key when sending it to us, and to do things like frequency capping. And now you can do, cross episode frequency capping, right? So if there's multiple different episodes in a particular, kind of vertical that they want to be able to frequency cap between different podcasts and things like that. So, it's a tough environment to serve into, right? Nobody's saying it's not. It is, but there are still some things you can do. And by taking that kind of infrastructure approach and putting those tools out there, we're constantly surprised with the ways that people are deciding to use our tools and the things that they're building with our technology.
And what you just mentioned there, that there's a key I can send that I built myself, right? So I can basically determine who that user is, keep that information local to me, and just provide you a key. And then if I understand what we talked about before correctly, I can upload data that isn't exposing in any way, but says this key matches to this profile, this action, this habit, or whatnot. And so now I can create my own targeting sets. I can use the built-in values that have to be passed: IP address, user agent, episode ID, timestamp, things like that, the standards of ad serving. But I can also build my own data sets however I want. And as long as I'm passing the value and I have uploaded into Kevel the data to match against it, I can go wild with that.
Yeah. In a kind of desktop or mobile use case, like typically there's access to lots more information. If the user is interested in all sorts of different stuff. In a podcast, you're gonna have to kind of infer that yourself. But you might know if they're subscribed, that user key is subscribed to 5 podcasts in a particular vertical. You can say like, well, we know they're a sports fan because they're listening to 5 of our sports podcasts, or they're frequently downloading those ones. And so you can store those kinds of insights and say like, let's target all of our users that are subscribed to at least 3 sports podcasts, or target all of our users that we think are interested in finance. All of that information can kind of be stored with us and then associate with that user key for targeting purposes.
That's really exciting. I really like that, because everything else in ad tech, and podcast ad tech specifically, relies heavily on IP address. And what you're saying here is that you can do things with IP address, but you minimize what you can do from it. And then you tell people from your own instance, use IP, match it, create a key that's unique to you that we're not going to dig into, and do something else with that. And Andrew, this is a topic that me and you have talked about a lot. IP address, the idea of sending it. The listeners have given you permission, you, Andrew, you, PRX, permission to their IP address. And the idea of sending it externally is just not something you're behind. You want to limit that.
That is something we try to limit a great deal. And part of so this really gets down to like being able to make choices, right? Like when you have an API that you're calling into, right, you have a lot more control about what you choose to send into that API and what you don't, right? Kevel's not going to know something. We're not going to put anything in that we don't feel comfortable sending. If we don't have consent, we don't have to send it. Likewise, if there's other data we do want to send, Kevel's really good at keyword matching, right? So if you want to start doing contextual advertising, you can do those kind of things. They also already help out with things like privacy safe GUIP lookups. So you can do things like, well, this is a country that's protected by GDPR, so we're not going to target there. But these other countries where that is okay, we can do a certain level of targeting that is reasonable and privacy safe. And even down to the device level, it's interesting. I read a press release not long ago from one of our competitors in the space talking about being able to target devices and things like that. And I'm like, oh, that's something we've been doing since 2015 because Kevel had that built in.
Yeah. It's it's the organization. Now for the device targeting, right? We have in the user agent, there's not a lot you can get from a user agent in podcasting. And we keep forgetting this because user agent value and identification comes from seeing it in multiple places. Well, you can't buy a mattress in Spotify. So the interaction that we see in the world with the Spotify user agent is a podcast ad request. So that means that partners like Kevel are stripping it down to the core things, right? We know this is an iPhone. We know the OS version. And then partners like PRX who use this can say, I know this is Spotify because that's unique data to me. That means that there's no reliance on it, right? If Andrew wanted, he could put in a request and say, hey, Kevel, and by the way, I hope you guys consider it, you should take the OPOG data that says what these user agents are and take it so that you have more information and do decisioning on there. But if Dylan says, we just don't have enough requests for it, Andrew's not stopped from that. He can take it, he can make that lookup on his end, he can pass that as a readable name in the request, and then he can target off that in the platform because it's something he's built out. So it means that
And
there's no roadblock, right? There might be a detour,
right.
but you ultimately control what you send and how you use it.
Exactly. And that what you're describing with the possible edit that we don't use the AllPug open source project, but rather one we maintain ourselves. But we do exactly that. Like we can do those lookups, identify those user agents as specific podcasting apps and agents that wouldn't show up as just, a flavor browser that's kind of built in, and we can pass that in. And, we haven't mentioned this, but like one of the really kind of sneaky tricks that we've used a lot in Kevel is something called Zircle. I think they call it custom targeting or custom queries or targeting, I think
Custom
now.
targeting, yep.
Custom targeting. There you go. But what you can essentially do is write expressions to target things, right? And we've done bizarre things with this over the years as people have asked us for things. Like we want to target every other episode, like only the odd numbered episodes. Can you do that? Like, well, yes, actually, I can use a simple expression in these kind of queries and like do something like that. I can match regular expressions or like search functions, other things like that, as well as just basic logical expressions and things. So I haven't really seen that in any other ad server, to be honest. That kind of flexibility. Well, I've seen it in one other, but like it's definitely not in like the podcasting space.
Let me tell you, Andrew, you just said the scariest thing in the world to probably someone like me and Dylan on the solution side, and I'm sure you on the technology side. You basically just said, hey, salespeople, using this tool means that your ad ops team can't say no. There's always a solution, which is, I don't think that's great. I think that in general, salespeople should sell around what's built, what's programmed, but being able to say like, hey, we have a client with a custom request. Could we do something? Right? That's neat. I've seen so many examples of what you said, like the odd number targeting, like, awesome, cool. That means that, Ashley's going to stay late. And when the episode's live, they're going to negative target that one and pause it because there's no way to automate it. There's no way to build it and do it. And the campaign's got to go live. So what do? We throw humans at it. That's the deep, dark secret of ad tech in general. If something's too good to be true, a lot of the times it's just a bunch of humans in hamster wheels, sadly. But this
I've been in that role before. I certainly remember staying up until midnight Eastern to set up homepage takeover live in past jobs and everything else.
Yeah. And that's what the original version of AI and ad tech was, just some guy named Steve staying up till midnight. Right? But this is really neat. And so you guys use, what do you use to do like the geolocation lookup? Like Andrew said that if it's in a GDPR territory, you stop the line there, which is super cool. But you're moving to a new geo lookup, right?
Yeah. And geo is such an interesting thing because we certainly have a lot of privacy, security conscious customers who don't want to pass IP addresses at all, or IP addresses don't really like map to their particular use case. So we have a customer of ours that's in the ticketing space, and they basically found like metro areas, the way that like DMA targeting kind of works is in an ad server, doesn't accommodate like where people buy tickets. People in, the Bay Area might go to a concert in San Francisco or Oakland, but not in San Jose, even though it's the same TV market. And so we have lots of customers who are determining their own location information. They'll grab the IP address, determine the location, pass it to us as keywords. And so whether it's because your kind of DMA targeting doesn't necessarily map, or because you don't want to pass IP addresses at all, certainly different use cases for that. So yeah, you mentioned we're moving to digital elements to handle our IP lookups. So looking for particularly better accuracy outside of the US. There's a bunch of providers out there. They're all pretty spot on in the US. But as we're continuing to grow and getting a lot of new customers outside the US, it's more important to have a lot of accuracy outside the US as well. That's
very cool. I like that worldly approach. I think that every company that is looking to really succeed in podcasting needs to realize that while there's a lot of ad dollars in the US, there's a lot more ears worldwide. And we really, really need to take advantage of that. And we really need to build towards a global mindset. You have some other really neat, like targeting, like I guess the big thing here is that while there are some things that need to be mapped, right? Like you might call something slightly different one to the other. The advantage is that, an engineering team is taking your API, and it ultimately doesn't matter what it's called because they're building the interface on their end. And as long as it matches up to the description correctly, it doesn't matter if you call something a strategy or a line item and they call it the inverse. They can call it what they want in their UI as long as they match technically. So can you walk me through some of the other things that I can target off of?
Yeah, definitely. And before that, just to kind of mention, I think it's important to talk a little bit about like what you're mentioning there is really about like making things easier for advertisers. So stripping away like ad tech, right? Like it's so complicated. It's do you want a bidded system with, first price auction, second price auction? Is it bidding on a CPM or a CPC or a download or anything else? And so really the idea there is like put APIs out there so that people can build like super simple, clean interfaces that says like, yeah, I want to buy an ad in these podcasts or in this other context, and make it really easy for somebody who's never bought ads before to be able to use it. And so those APIs, and building out like that self-serve platform for managing and monitoring and doing all of that, super, super important. In terms of targeting, some of the other stuff that we've seen, day and hour, if people are downloading a podcast in the morning on their way to work, and you want to put a Starbucks or coffee shop ad within those, we certainly see that. Obviously, the kind of third-party data, if you have the access to IP address, you can kind of identify a user and get data from other sources and then store that with us. You can certainly target on that third-party data as well. And one that I'm kind of like interested in, and I don't think that PRX is doing it yet, or anybody else really, but I'm fascinated by, is actually like taking episode content, running a service through a transcription that pulls out like topics that this episode is about, and storing that with us in what we call Content DB. And then targeting like episode content. Target the first thing that comes to mind is like sports injuries. Maybe a hospital wants to advertise in every episode about sports injuries when they bring up that kind of topic. So it's something that Andrew, we should talk about sometime. Having kind of a service that would process that and store that kind of episode content information with us to enable targeting based on something like that.
Well, I hate to tell you, but we already do that. But we do it. But we don't store. The only difference is we don't store the data with y'all, because we do have so much other episode data that we expose and want to make editable. But as I was kind of saying, I think you're kind of alluding to this, Brian, that the limits of what you can target really are the limits of what data you have.
Yeah.
Because any data that you have that you can express, there's a way to pass it into Kevel, because they kind of see everything as like you can name your own parameters that you pass in, your own metadata that you pass in, and then use it however you want to use it, even to the degree, as I mentioned, of writing your own kind of expressions that target it. So a simple one though that's kind of out of the box though is something like a keyword. And but we've done things like, if you want to target things that are labeled as safe for kids, for example, right? Or content that's got some kind of content warning on it. Like that's a thing that we already have data about in podcasting. We can pass that along to Kevel as well and use that for targeting. And now I can exclude content that's safe, or include only content that's safe for the advertising. Any kind of keywords, classification, any kind of data that we've collected about an episode, either from transcript or from kind of manual tagging, we already pass all that data in right now and can use it. And we have some customers who use it extensively, especially ones with kind of bigger back catalogs and lots of episodes.
So basically what we're saying here is that you can pass the default values that are needed that we think about in podcasting, or you can take it internally and you can make all those values into something unique to you and pass that in there. And then you can set whatever logic you want around it. You can set caps, you can set positive or negative targeting. You can set conditional things that are based off of time of day plus this plus that. It's really the sky's the limit. Like Andrew, if that example for the topics, right, that you were doing there, you've decided you internally figured out how to tag that data, right? You're transcribing it, you're figuring out what your qualifications are for child safe data or child safe podcast, and then you're passing that keyword. Now that keyword is just something you have to set
exactly
to receive. And then you have to build out the ability to say target by this. How quick was that to build?
Well, that's the thing, is like it's very quick. Honestly, the main thing you have to do at that point is update the call to Kevel, right? You have to know that data. Like if you've got the data, again, like if it's stuff you've already got or collected, you're already asking the publisher to provide, the producer to provide. It's a pretty simple kind of code change, if you will, to just add that to the stuff you're already sending. And then on the other side, as you say, you get to drive your ad ops people crazy by saying, hey, we have this new piece of data for you to use. I think part of the challenge here is very much to communicate, I think, to people what is possible and work with the sales teams and other to kind of know this is what we are capable of doing. These are things that are possible, or these are things that are easy and these are things that are hard. But certainly things that we get a lot of requests for, like some of the things like keyword targeting, things like that. That's stuff we've kind of had, I think, from the beginning because it's just so incredibly helpful.
I really am a big fan of buy versus build. And the reason is because I don't think that it's necessarily a lifetime thing for everyone. I think you can grow out of it. But as someone with a 3-year-old and another kid on the way, I recently started thinking about this. We bought a rug, one of those cool kids rugs that has like the roads on it. And it's really neat. But when my son wants more roads, that rug doesn't work anymore. So if we buy like the train set or the road connector tools where he can build whatever road he wants, every day he sets it up, he can build different paths or he can add on to it. We don't have to get a new rug every time. And ad serving is tough. And the idea of building something future-proof enough that you did build it with all APIs, or that you did separate it enough that your hosting and your ad serving are completely separate so that if one crashes, it doesn't take down the other, is rare. And it's not rare. Like nobody messed up by doing that. We're just, a lot of us are under pressure to get this stuff done and get it out there. So the fact that you can iterate on this stuff so quickly, so the fact that someone can go spend a Friday afternoon and come up with the ability to send 1 million impressions and see what comes out of it, it's like giving someone that road construction set and saying the sky's the limit. Build your default. You want to glue those in place? You can, but the secret is the glue doesn't really hold if you really don't want it to. And then just add on to it or rearrange it or redo it, whatever. Set up a new instance, try over, start from scratch. And like, that's just what's really attractive. And I truly mean it. This isn't a solution just for people who haven't dug into this yet. This is something that you should consider. Do you want to keep hiring engineers for that? Do you want to keep being responsible for it? Is it worth offloading to? You can try it. It sounds like Andrew says setting up in a week means that you could parallel try it out, see if it works for you, and then call it a day and get back if you like yours better. And then at some point, honestly, there are plenty of companies out there that started using AdsWiz as a backend or using Omni Studio and then decided they wanted to build their own. And they did. And that's okay too. But yeah, I mean, I'm such, the fact that this exists is like a nerd dream because I don't know, it's so dedicated. I'm really a big fanboy of it.
We see a lot of people that love to be able to just test new things, especially around like pricing. Like pricing is such a complex thing to build, right? Like you go out and you say like, okay, we know that we're going to price on a CPM or cost per download, right? Cost per 1,000 downloads. And maybe your business team says like, we want to try allowing our advertisers to bid instead and set up an auction for episodes or for a certain podcast. Like, okay, so you're going to spend 6 weeks building out all of this auction logic, testing it, and then that advertiser that really was pushing your sales team or your business team to enable this says, "Yeah, we're fine with the other method," and it's like all of that time is wasted. So we see a ton of people that just like to be able to test stuff. What would happen if we move to an auction model? Let's try it in one podcast. Let's try it in one section of our website or app. See how it goes, and great, iterate on top of it. Maybe it works and moves everything that way. Maybe it doesn't, but it's an afternoon instead of 6 weeks of building something, testing it, learning, and figuring out that you're not going to end up using it at all.
And in general, ad tech has templates for how these things work, like how everything works. We're not following them in podcasting. We're really not. Everybody's just like auction model. I got an idea on how that works. And a lot of us here don't have a lot of ad tech experience. We got great engineering experience. We've got killer podcast and audio experience. But there's not a lot of people who are like, oh, yeah, I helped build X, Y, and Z in digital display or video or whatnot. And those people, not easy to find. But you know what's easy to find? Solid engineers that can use an API and can build off of what already exists there and mesh the two together with a new insight. Instead of being like, hey, product team, 6 weeks, define an auction model, right? Now you have the tools. We talked so much about targeting. We talked about the setup here, but reporting's like a real big thing. I mean, if I can target all this so granularly, can I get it? Like, Andrew, with what you get, like, did you really dictate every aspect of reporting, or did you hit like road bumps, or how would you describe the reporting experience?
It's definitely robust. I mean, without kind of just showing you the pages for how they work or the API for how you call them, like you have a lot of control, I think is the thing I would say. So you can decide exactly what granularity of data you want, how you roll it up, how you don't, the time range. Are you doing it by flight, campaign, creative? Are you grouping it by those things? So it's all the things you would want from kind of a very robust reporting tool to kind of meet your particular needs. We haven't really run into too many limits. I think we've built a little bit on top of the API. We actually did build a tool on top of the API even for reporting, because we just had some kind of needs that were they were just so repeatable, and they were so repeatable that we needed to kind of do the same presets and make everything, and we could just kind of shortcut that. But again, it was one of those, well, for 5 years we didn't need that, right? But then we got to a point where now we do want to do something a little bit more custom. Guess what? The API gives me access to all that same data, and I can make a little tool to make that work.
And I think that a lot of companies default to tools like Looker for reporting, which I don't think are bad. I think that there's absolutely use cases to use deep data tools like that, but they require specialists and they require people to learn a new product. And they do this because they can't prioritize building reporting and building ad serving and building hosting. And so, I mean, Andrew, do you guys use tools like Looker as well internally?
We have a few. We do many things.
But I mean, like, have you hit a situation where you didn't have the option to build out something on top of the API because you got the raw data you needed, and like you weren't basically, were you ever forced into having to use another tool because you couldn't get what you wanted out of it?
I think, well, there's kind of two kind of things that we do. There's things we kind of do for ourselves in our own reporting in our own ad ops team. And I think that they still very much use the Kevel data and APIs for just about everything they do. We have run into cases. We also run, though, Dovetail as a product that we offer for other people to use and access. And at that point, it's, we need to be able to pull out just their data. I don't want to give them a menu where they can pick everyone's data. I want to, create a much more kind of an experience with some guardrails and that has just what we want to show them. So for that purpose, we build our own kind of metrics and dashboard and reporting for other people to use. And we also use another kind of reporting tool, QuickSights from AWS, that's very similar to a Tableau or a Lookery or something, where we can gin up some specific reports and things. But I think what I want to speak to, though, is like a lot of those are combining other data as well that isn't necessarily in there, such as download data, like IAB compliant download data and other things that aren't necessarily in the system. And I think that's where those tools really shine, and I think people will still find a need for them. I will say that if you want to build that on top of Kevel data, they ship data and logs if you want to aggregate those. So if you want to pull those up from, like, I think an S3 bucket, that's a thing you can do too. So that's also a case they've thought about. And if I could just take one more moment to say, like, to your point about build versus buy, we're all facing a lot of the same problems.
Yeah.
Right. And the different, right, like all the things you're talking about, you could talk to any of these anybody who's built a product like this or tool like this, they have all these same problems. You're doing reporting, you're having to do some custom, you're aggregating into data marts and dashboards and things. But that's why having a company that's focused on this particular set of problems and shared problems, that's really going deep on it, lets you then go focus on other things, right? Like I can go worry about, I need to do, I don't know, FLAC support now for audio downloads, or something. And like, that's my problem. I'll go deal with audio. That's what we're really adept at. I don't have to constantly worry about, well, actually now it's the 4.2 version of VAST that I need to have a template for, like that's something that, Kevel's already worried about.
And that's great. As someone in product management for a long time, getting it on someone else's roadmap and not yours is quite the win. It might be hard to put a price on that often. yeah, I guess the last thing that I really want to dig into here that I think is really important to explain is that, IAB certification is such a big part of the industry. I think that having a framework that we all agree on for what is a download, what is ad delivered, and all of these aspects are really important. Now, what's interesting here is between the two of you, that's two separate products, right? One has downloads, one has ad delivered, right? So that means that each of you individually, I mean, I guess Dovetail on its own, absent of Kevel, could get download certified for IAB. And I guess Kevel could theoretically, probably not, get certified for IAB. But the thing is that Kevel on its own can't deliver an ad. So how does that work? If I am a hosting platform and I want to get IAB certified and I don't own the A to Z, how do I get IAB certified for both downloads and ad delivered with my own CDN and Kevel?
I can talk a little bit about how we implemented IAB v2 compatibility. And again, we originally built before that existed, I'll just say, right? Because we were doing this before there was kind of the version 2 or even the version 1 of the podcast measurement from the IAB. I think this gets back to, at least for how we did it and like the role that Kevel plays in that. Kevel is able to integrate with the kind of server side work that we have to be able to do, right? And again, like a lot of other companies that are in the ad tech space are very focused on web and often only web. Maybe they do a little bit with like native in mobile, but for the most part, they probably started like something in web and then added API capabilities, whereas Kevel is API first. And because of that, there's a great way to integrate with them to make your server-side calls to figure out what ads you want, which we've talked a lot about. And the other side of that is when I want to log an impression, such as only at the point at which we've downloaded a minute of audio, not including ID3 tags, that is a decision our server can make and then send that signal back to Kevel, and we can decide when we want to do that, or we can basically hold on to the logic inside of our CDN, inside of what we're doing to track the moment at which we've downloaded enough bytes or a single download has met that threshold, and then trigger that impression logging back onto the Kevel side. And that's kind of the contract, right? Like they tell us, we have a contractor request, these are the ads we want to place, and then they send back to us, and these are how you will tell us, these are the impression URLs you'll give us to say that you've actually met that threshold and want to log that. And all of that can be done kind of server side and handled that way, which is how we're able to do it. I don't know, I can get more technical, but that's
no, I think that's
idea.
good. I guess the next step of technical is that people should either work directly with Dovetail or hire Andrew as a contractor. But that's good. I mean, basically what you're saying is it's possible. All the paths are there. And then from my understanding, Kevel has worked with at least 2, if not more, partners that are IAB compliant or certified, which is really powerful. I mean, Kevel is in a lot of ad tech and podcasting. Some of it can be talked about publicly like PRX, some of it not part of the contract, and that's fine. But I think the big thing here that I really want to emphasize is that these guys are worth a conversation with, whether Andrew directly to learn, someone in this space that I continue to learn a lot from, or the Kevel team because you want to give it a go. I mean, at the end of the day, Andrew's team got it up and running in a matter of weeks and a week, right? And so if you wanted to test this in parallel, if you can peel somebody off, it means that you can reach out to Dylan and team, get a test account, give it a shot. And if it works for you, awesome. And if it's not, you didn't lose anything. You didn't have to break your process to try it out. You got to do it in tandem, not hosted by you. And you really can't beat that sometimes. So thank you both so much for joining me. This has been so fun. It's such a different approach to the deep dive, but the truth is the UI, the walkthrough here, that's not what this one is about. This is a pure technical deep dive of saying, hey, you can build whatever you want. And we have an opportunity to do that with a company that is taking ad tech seriously to the point where that's all they do. So thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks a lot.